I'm Julie Pace for the Associated Press on the White House North Lawn. I'm joined by Jared Bernstein, the director of the President's Middle Class Task Force, and we're talking, of course, about the economy. Quickly, I just want to ask you, Fed Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke came out today and said that the recession is probably over. Does the administration feel that same way?
Well, I think what was important was that the way the Fed chair framed this, he said, in a technical sense, the recession may be behind us. And we know that private sector forecasters have suggested that the economy may be expanding at a moderate pace in GDP or gross domestic product terms. From our perspective, in the White House, the president, the vice president, you're talking to the executive director of the Middle Class Task Force, what matters are jobs, incomes, and wages. And that certainly has not come back yet. So while it may be a recovery in a technical sense, as you heard some people, not us, but you heard others call, in a sense in terms of how it feels toward working families, not there yet.
Well, I'll ask you the question then, all of us here when we go out on the road, and that's, when can Americans start to expect to see that jobless rate come down?
I think what folks have to realize and even appreciate is that the rate of loss, whether we're talking about job growth or GDP, has significantly diminished. So the economy was contracting at faster than 6% in the first quarter. We were losing 700,000 jobs per month, over 2 million jobs in the first quarter. Now, that rate of contraction is down to about 1% in GDP terms last quarter, maybe as we just said, expanding this quarter, job loss about 1/3 of what it used to be. Now, that kind of less bad is not at all what we're shooting for. We're trying to implement the Recovery Act, the financial stability programs, the kinds of regulations the president talked, in order to make sure that there's a robust recovery in place down the road. Now, my crystal ball doesn't tell you what date those net negatives turn into net positives, but I can tell you we're moving in that direction.
Now, the president's out today. He's talking to working class, middle class Americans, trying to point out to them that we have seen some recoveries in the economy. But how do you get that message across to Americans if they aren't seeing the changes in jobs?
Well, first of all, we are seeing some changes in some sectors. So, for example, we've learned recently that the manufacturing sector, which was so hard hit by this downturn, has for the first time been showing some increases in output, and there are anecdotal stories of some hiring. We know from the Recovery Act that we're saving or creating around 1 million jobs so far. Now again, that doesn't mean that we are offsetting all of the recessionary impact that that's having on the job market, but we're helping to diminish those negatives such that in a sense you're filling up a very deep hole. When we climb out of that hole, again, it's hard to say precisely when.
And today we had some good news with the retail sales being up, but there's concern that we won't be able to maintain that. How should people look at numbers like those that we see come out?
Well, I think in almost every one of these reports, you have the kind of dynamic that you and I were just discussing. There's some clear positive news, or in many cases less negative news, often associated with the policies that we've been implementing. So cash for clunkers, of course, shows up in retail sales and autos on the auto side of the report. But if you pull out autos, you actually still see some positive retail sales. We know that the unemployment rate is still high. It's probably still rising a bit, but it's rising more slowly. We know that we're losing fewer jobs than we were. And so all of those less bad kind of indicators mean that Americans are beginning to climb out of this very deep recession, but we are just not there yet.
And finally, I want to touch on healthcare, which of course is part of the president's message to middle class, working class Americans. You know, the president prides himself on being able to go out. He says that when people hear his plan, then they will agree with what he has to say. But there's still a lot of concern about this price tag. $900 billion, and that's pretty scary to any American who's seen us bail out all kinds of industries. How do you reassure Americans that this money is not going to be coming out of their pockets?
I think the best way to do that is to quote the president himself, who says he will not sign a plan that adds one dime to the deficit. This will be deficit neutral. And how does he get there? Not, I want to underscore that word, on the backs of the middle class. He does so by, for example, reeling in some of the extreme inefficient and ineffective spending. For example, there's a Medicare Advantage program. It's called Medicare Advantage. This is a program that subsidizes private insurers to provide services that Medicare can provide much more effectively and efficiently. There's almost $200 billion in there over 10 years. Now that's the kind of wrenching inefficiencies out of the system that's going to help us get there. And he has a full set of similar kinds of I would say, efficiency enhancers, quality treatment as opposed to quantity, effective as opposed to the most expensive, that's where those savings are going to come from.
Waste and efficiency, is that enough though to reach $900 billion?
Well, if it's not, he's not going to sign the plan. So I think what's most important is for folks to be reassured on two fronts. This will not add to the deficit, and it won't involve taxing the middle class.
Okay. Jared Bernstein, Executive Director of the White House Middle Class Task Force. I'm Julie Pace for the Associated Press.